Very excited about tonight's episode. We do have on a special guest that we want to welcome to the program, Mr. George Stoia, who has spent the last 3 years covering the Denver Broncos for the Denver Gazette, back in the state of Oklahoma, back in the 405, the newest member of the SoonerScoop crew. Let's welcome on George to the podcast. George, how are you, sir?
I am fantastic. I'm a little wet. It's pouring outside. But I'm doing really well. It's been kind of a whirlwind of a week for me. As you guys mentioned before we got on here, I do finally have some furniture. I know I've said that a few other places. I've not had any furniture. And then I actually wrote some stories today. You mentioned a couple of them there for the border regions, but yeah, it's been a busy first few days back in Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you, George. And I know it's you're hitting the ground running with what you're doing with SoonerScoop, just putting out some more content. I'm excited to see, as the weeks and the months progress, some of the new stuff that maybe hasn't been announced yet that's coming there. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about this in regards to why you chose to leave what was probably considered one of the best jobs in the entire country in sports, in covering the Denver Broncos, one of a few NFL franchises out there. A lot of people are clamoring for those jobs, but you called it a no-brainer in that article on SoonerScoop, just saying, hey, here's why I went to SoonerScoop. And I don't think that OU fans necessarily fully grasp that, because as fans, we're like, duh, it's a no-brainer. It's Oklahoma.
Right.
And you mentioned how OU is kind of like the pro team in the state. But I would love to hear a little more, maybe more unpack, like, why was it such a no-brainer to go to SoonerScoop? Like, what do you see in them? And Tyler and I as subscribers, like, we kind of get it because we're behind the paywall a little bit. But what do you see in SoonerScoop that made it such a no-brainer for you?
Well, I think it's a few things. Like, and I mentioned in there too, it's also a very personal thing because obviously I'm from here. My family lives here. And I think you guys probably know this. You're around my age, I would assume. At least you guys look like it. You look young. But when I was in college, my first thought was, I want to win all the awards. I want to get the big job. I want to be in the big market and all that stuff. And I had a great job in Denver, and that is a massive market. And, covering the NFL is something that's very rare that you get to do, especially at my age. It was awesome. But I think as I got older, I was like, man, like, I miss being home for the holidays. I haven't been home for Christmas in several years. Thanksgiving is the same way. And some of that stuff won't go away covering college football either. But certain, family events not being there for, I think that as I grew older, I was like, I just want to be somewhere that I'm really, really happy. And I was happy in Denver, but this is like, I just light up talking about being back in Oklahoma. But in terms of SoonerScoop, when I was a student at the OU Daily, and even before I was a student, SoonerScoop has been, in my opinion, the best outlet covering the team for 20 years now, probably ever since really Carey invented the website in the late 90s. And they always broke the news. I always thought that they wrote some of the more interesting things. I like the way that they allow their personalities, aka Eddie, be themselves, right? That's very rare in today's media atmosphere, to be at a place that allows you to be yourself in a way, not only in your writing or your work that you're doing, but just in life. And I really appreciate that about them. And I've gotten to know Carey and Eddie and Josh and Bob, all those guys throughout the years, because I covered the team for 3 years for the student newspaper, and they respected my work and I respected their work, and we just got to know each other. And this was always something that I thought might be a possibility. And they reached out. Honestly, it was like, I think it was back in September maybe, that they first reached out. So it's been in the works, sort of for a while now. And obviously we had to work some things out, and nothing became official till later. But when they reached out, it was, to me, a very real opportunity that I wanted to consider, because I knew, one, it'd get me back home, but two, again, to the SoonerScoop point, they're, in my opinion, the premier site. And there's just a lot of things that, to look forward to at Scoop. We have, like you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of plans for us in the future about what I'm going to be doing and who I'm going to be working with and things like that. And I can't get into all that stuff, but that part really, excites me. And so I just think that in today's world, and I'm going on a rant here, but in today's world, like, I've seen how the newspaper business works. And the fact that they're not adding, almost any paper is adding positions, right, is a big red flag. And for a place like SoonerScoop to be adding people in a time that nowhere else is, is a big green flag. So that to me made it really a no-brainer.
Well, George, I speak for a lot of people when we say how excited we are to have you back covering, the University of Oklahoma athletic department. It's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to, continue to enjoy your content that you put out. It's been coming nonstop for the last couple of days. We look forward to, more of it in the future. But, George, last year you covered a team, the Broncos, who were, by a large portion of the fan base, a huge disappointment. Very similar to what the Oklahoma Sooners just went through in the NFL here in Denver. That prompted a coaching change, but at OU, the circumstances are different. The fans remain almost unanimously behind Brent, his vision for the program, one final year in the Big 12, going into the SEC in 2024. But in your opinion, George, what win total or outcome this year keeps everybody on board with Brent once the season is ended? In other words, is it fair to be expecting that OU is going to be contending for a Big 12 championship, contending for a playoff spot, or do we kind of have to be a little bit more realistic, thinking that because of the huge roster turnover in the last 18 months, this is still a work in progress? This is still a project that Brent Venables is working on.
Well, I think it's definitely still a work in progress. I think that it's going to take time, and I think the biggest, sticking with the flag references here, the biggest green flag for Brent is that he was able to recruit the way that he did despite that record. And so I think you're automatically going to see, a lot of good change this next year in terms of who's on the roster, who's playing, right? But in terms of next year, it's tough to say because it's like they could go 9-3, and you're like, oh, that's not bad. But like, what were those 3 losses? Was one of them a 49-0 loss to Texas again? Like that's not good, right? I don't know if he would last if that were to happen again. If it's an 8-4, what if it's an 8-4, but those 4 losses were really close, right? And they were to really good teams or whatever it is, then maybe you look at it differently. But I think it's in that range, right? Like if they go 8-4 next year, there's gonna be a lot of pissed off people, I would assume. Still, I know that's a little bit of an improvement. I think 9-3, you're kind of right there in the middle. I also think 9-3 could get you in the Big 12 title game. So again, that could look totally different if you can get there and maybe you win that game. My expectation is 10-2. I mean, the way I look at the schedule, I think they should be 5-0 heading into Dallas. The way that it lines up for them, I just don't see those first 5 opponents being teams that they should lose to. I think they're going to have a lot more talent. Then you get to Texas, and I think Texas is going to be really good next year. And I know we say that every year, but I actually believe it. I think they're going to be pretty good next year. So that's a tough game. But then everybody else on the schedule, man, I just don't see a scenario where they shouldn't have more talent. And I also think this coaching staff is going to get better. I mean, one of the things that I was very critical about Brent a year ago that I'm very interested to see how he does this next year is game management. I mean, I thought there were several games, and when you lose, what was it, 3 or 4 games by 3 points or less, a lot of that is determined on how the game is managed, right? I mean, I know it's a few plays here, a few plays there, but it's also a few timeouts here, a few timeouts there, maybe change the pace. I mean, the Bedlam game, I know they won, but I remember yelling at my TV, what are they doing with the, doing the hurry up offense over and over. So those small things can go a long ways. And so I'm really interested to see what that looks like. And then, I think they've done a really good job in the transfer portal. I've said it several times now since I've come back, but a year ago they got transfers from, Wyoming, Tulane, Hawaii, those sorts of places. This year they're getting them from Indiana, Wake Forest, Oklahoma State. And again, it's not a knock on those guys from a year ago, but it's a little bit different caliber player that they are bringing in this year. I mean, the kid from Indiana, Deshaun McCulloch, I think that's how you say his last name, McCulloch, whatever. They don't have a guy like that. I mean, that's a dude. And, I think he can be a huge difference maker. And Deshaun White was a nice player last year at the cheetah position, but this guy can win you a football game. And I think that's kind of what they missed at times last year. So I think it's going to be really interesting. But yeah, I think the expectation, what I would tell fans is, the expectation should be to compete for a Big 12 championship. But if they don't win one, I wouldn't call that a failure by any means next season, because this is going to take time. But, I think that if they're not competing for a Big 12 championship, then it's maybe time to press the panic button.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think there's a big mental difference between 9 wins and 10 wins.
Yes.
So I think you're right there. The schedule definitely lines up for 10 wins to be a very realistic possibility. There's definitely some soft parts of the schedule there. So spring practice starts here in 10 days or so, and we're going to be able to get to know this team a little bit better. There's a lot of differences now in college football with the transfer portal, with new high school recruits, a lot more of them coming into the spring practice setting there. So, what do you think is going to be the position battle that Sooner fans need to be most tuned into to see that, hey, that 10 wins is a reality based on how that position battle is going?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several. I'll give you one on offense and one on defense. I think on offense, I'm really interested at receiver because you're losing a guy in Marvin Mims that, he was so productive during his time, and it felt like anytime they needed a big play down the field, he was their guy. And I know, him and Dylan, weren't always on the same page, but they also were on the same page quite a bit in terms of those big plays. Who's going to be that guy? I think we all assume it's going to be Farouk, but who are some of those younger guys that can step up? I thought that was a position that they would maybe get more in the portal. And we didn't really see. I know they got the kid from Michigan that I think is a nice player, but what does he look like? Who's going to step up? Who's going to be maybe one of those younger guys that can step into a role? I think tight end is also an interesting one because you lose a guy like Willis who, not only was a great player on the field last year, but a team captain. Can Austin Stogner, kind of step back in? That's such an interesting story. So I would say those. I mean, I could go down the list. I think the offensive line, right? Like, who's going to step into some of those roles? I think those are some interesting battles. On defense, I think that it feels like linebacker is pretty set in terms of Stutzman and Kanik. I would assume those are going to be the guys. Maybe some other guys push for a spot there. The defensive line, they got a lot of guys back. I'm interested to see, does some of these younger guys or some of these transfers come in at defensive end? Obviously, a lot of talk about PJ Adebare. I hope I said that right. I think that he's a guy that can contribute from day one. Bothroyd from Wake Forest. I think that he'll push for a starting spot. What does Trace Ford look like out there? Is he healthy? But for me, the biggest one that I'm most excited about to watch is the Cheetahs position, because it seems like it's Deshaun McCulloch, to take over that role. But, I know there's also been mentioned maybe he'll move inside. Maybe they'll do some different things with him. There's been a lot of names that have been mentioned at that Cheetah spot, as well as safety. And it feels like, if two guys emerge there, maybe somebody else moves to safety, like Peyton Bowen, I know has been mentioned at Cheetah, but will he play safety? So it's one of those things that it's going to be interesting to see how that secondary shakes out, because I think some of those other spots are pretty much, we know what it's going to look like, but I think safety is also where they can just get a lot better. I don't want to just sit here and, crap on Justin Broyles, but they upgraded at that position, right? Like I think Justin was a nice role player and he was a good kid, but they really upgraded there. And I think that's a position that can be a huge difference maker in this type of defense. So I'm really interested to see what they do at the Cheetah / safety position.
George, I know for a lot of people, especially for Adam and I, being, 27, 28 years old, coming off of a 6-7 type year, that's not something that really either of us, or, even including you in this as well, have really, ever had to experience in our time as, fans or covering the University of Oklahoma. But, coming off of a 6-7 year, someone had to be the scapegoat for last year's losing record. Some fans pinned it on Ted Roof as the DC. Others, like you alluded to just a second ago, BV's blunders with late game management. But oddly enough, and I can't believe that, a lot of fans felt this way, a lot of them kind of pinned it, the failures of last year on the performance of Dylan Gabriel in key moments. Now, Dylan Gabriel, he's got a 5-star behind him right now. Jackson Arnold coming in from Denton Guyer, who's casting a big-time shadow already. George, what does Dylan Gabriel need to do to change this perception from the fan base and hopefully avoid getting himself into a similar situation like we saw, 2 years ago from Spencer Rattler, the incumbent starting quarterback who's got Caleb Williams, breathing down his throat, and we all know how that turned out. So what does DG need to do, especially early on in this season, to keep that from happening?
I don't know if there's anything he can do to change, because I know how OU fans operate, and I get it, right? Especially when we saw it, like you mentioned, a couple years ago. Now that's happened with the Caleb Williams situation, that's going to be everybody's point to anytime Dylan makes a mistake is, well, just play Jackson Arnold, because we did it with Caleb Williams a couple years ago. The problem is, I just don't know. I think Jackson Arnold's going to be a really good player. Don't get me wrong. I think Caleb Williams is generational. Like, I think that guy is just a phenomenal player. And I thought he was incredible last year at USC. I think he's going to go on and be fantastic in the NFL. Jackson Arnold, I haven't seen that yet. I think he's going to be great. Don't get me wrong. He could go on to win the Heisman and be the number 1 pick. I don't know. But to throw a true freshman into that, it's a really tough thing to do. I mean, there's a reason Lincoln didn't do it with Caleb until, partway through that Texas game. So I think that's going to be the hard part. I think Dylan's biggest issues is he's just not very consistent, right? Like, we've seen it at times where he throws a ball on the money down the sideline to Stoops or Mims or whoever, and you're like, wow, where did that come from, right? And then he'll just miss somebody wide open, right? He's not very good over the middle of the field at times. I think that's also just kind of how the offense is designed. There's a lot of vertical routes, so you don't see a lot of crossing routes over the middle at times. But I think that those are things that, he's got to be more consistent. But the reality is, I don't think we're going to see a ton of Jackson Arnold unless Dillon Gabriel gets hurt. I think that Dillon Gabriel also gets a bad rap because at Oklahoma, we've seen what unbelievably great quarterbacks look like. When you talk about Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, even Jalen Hurts, like, these guys were once in a lifetime type quarterbacks, and you had them, however many straight years that was, 5-6 years. And then you go to a guy like Dillon Gabriel, who, in my honest opinion, is still maybe the best quarterback in the Big 12. He's a very good college football quarterback, but he's not that same caliber as those other guys. You could even make the argument he's probably a top 10, top 15 quarterback in college football, which is a hard thing to do. But, I think that, really good is not great at Oklahoma, right? And so it's a hard thing to live up to. And I think Jackson Arnold will be great at Oklahoma, but I also think it's important for his development that he doesn't, have to be forced into a situation where he's trying to, like, save the season in some capacity, right? And again, I think the schedule lines up where you can win a lot of football games with Dillon Gabriel. I think they could easily win 10 games, if not the conference, with Dillon Gabriel at quarterback. And I think a large part of that's going to be, I think the run game is going to be really good next year. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I don't know if he can do anything other than just get better. And at this point in his career, I don't know how much of that is actually possible.
It certainly amazed me how underappreciated I felt that his season was last year, especially considering that we didn't have Dillon Gabriel for a game and a half, and we saw the results there, and there was literally nothing behind him, and people were still so upset with what Dillon Gabriel did throughout the season. And of course, all 7 losses were not on him. Maybe not even one of them was, but it's amazing how underappreciated he was. It was kind of
just
like
don't play Davis Bevel. That's that's the key.
Yeah, for sure. Well, kind of wanted to wrap up with our final question around something that you were really talking about today with the Board of Regents. They met. They were reviewing the $250 million proposed facilities for both the Football Operations Center and I believe an academic center in there as well. So a lot of money funneling that direction. But something that I think a lot of fans are maybe even more interested in is what could change for the stadium in the future, because it's been close to 10 years now since that South End Zone Stadium was first announced. And we haven't seen anything really major since then. We actually took this particular question over to our Twitter and asked fans, what they wanted to see as an update for the stadium. We got a couple scary responses, at least for Tyler and I as former athletic ticket office employees, people saying they wanted to expand the stadium to 100,000. And we know how difficult that is in today's age to sell that many tickets. Or I know there's one person that said remove the first 2 to 3 rows of the sidelines because it's too cramped. And I would not want to make those phone calls to those season ticket holders, but we also got a lot of been there and done that. Yeah. We also got a lot of people that said, hey, the press box needs to be updated. And I thought you'd be a great voice here to kind of give some insight into the press box specifically, because I find it interesting just from my perspective that fans are saying, hey, we need a new press box. It's so embarrassing. And yet most of them have probably never stepped foot in there, don't know really why it's embarrassing or anything. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on why an update there would be so important.
Well, I can tell you, I've been to every press box in the Big 12 except for Texas. Because obviously they never play at Texas, but it is I would say either the worst or the second worst press box in the Big 12 next to Iowa State. Iowa State's is very bad. They don't have air conditioning at the Iowa State one. So that probably makes it last. But it's just, I think what it is it's just outdated is the biggest thing. There's not a ton of space up there, at least where the media is. I've seen where the coaches are, and they have a little bit more space in terms of, where the coordinators and those folks are. And so I think that's part of it. They only have one elevator, which is a bit of a pain in the butt, especially when, coaches are trying to get down the field, media's trying to get down the field. You have suites up there, people are trying to get up and down. And so a lot of times you're maybe taking the stairs all the way down to the very bottom, which is a, massive, I work out, right. But not everybody does. And so it's a little bit of a hassle for that. So I would just say that it's just old, man. It gets really hot up there, and I'm complaining. I know every fan in the world listening to this is like, yeah, dude, we're standing out in the 110 degree heat in September. And I was like, yeah, I know. I apologize, but it's just old. And I also just think it doesn't look great. I don't know if that's just my take, but even just when you see it from a distance, you're just like, oh, that's old. It just looks old. And I think they could update it in a way that also benefits those seats up there. And maybe creates more suites, which is what you want to do, right? I mean, that's where the money is, people paying for those type of premium seats. So I think that's what they need to do. And in terms of, what the timeline is on that, Joe C actually was asked about that today. And he basically just said they're still, have an architect looking at how to do it. And, it didn't get finished years ago because it was supposed to be phase 2 of the, South End Zone was phase 1. That was supposed to be phase 2. And it basically didn't get done because they didn't have the money. The economy wasn't great at the time, and just kind of got put on the back burner. And now you've got all these other projects. They really need to get the softball thing done, which it sounds like it's going to be done next year. Baseball needs upgrades. I mean, the LNC is a disaster, so they're trying to figure that out. Now they're committed to this, $175 million football facility project. So they've just got all these things. And I think it just keeps getting put on the back burner. I think it'll get done eventually. And I think also with this move to the SEC, they're going to have so much more money coming in. But that sort of project, it's going to take years to complete. So unfortunately for me and all my media pals, we're going to be stuck in that thing for, I think, a little bit longer. But yeah, it's kind of disappointing, and it's also expensive. I mean, it was I think it's $160 million project or something, and I'm sure it's gone up. I don't know.
Oddly enough, I can remember back in, what was it, Adam? 2017, 2018, our first couple of years working in the ticket office, we actually had the blueprints for the phase 2 of the expansion in the ticket office that we were taking a look at. But obviously that's outdated now. And with ultimately Oklahoma going to the SEC, price tags going up, a lot more things are more affordable now. So you've got to feel like Oklahoma, it's the plans are going to be, bigger and better as opposed to what they were 6 or 7 years ago. But George, I got 2 quick ones here for you. Starting, just like I said, this first one has nothing to do with football whatsoever. You made the move back from Denver to Oklahoma. First place in Norman you just had to go eat at back in town.
Eat or drink at, because I've
either or. Throw a couple of them out there.
So I went to the Mont for sure. I had to go to the Mont and got the chips and queso. I love their chips and queso there. Yeah. And then I went to, and this one's more obscure, and I think it was more of just a personal thing for me, is Das Boot on Main Street. I don't know if you guys have ever been there. Oh, yeah. It's like a German bar. I really like it because no one ever goes there. I'm surprised they're still in business because every time I go, there's no one there. And the drinks are half off after 9 p.m. And it's, comes in the boot, which I think is cool. And it's cheap. And so I had to go there and drink and eat some pretzels. But Ocon's, I've been there. I love Ocon's, and I mean, the food's not amazing there, but I just like the vibe. It's a big vibes place. And then I'm supposed to go to the library this week. I don't know if you guys have been to the library.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the library. I could go on and on. Volare, which I always said Volare, but I guess it's Volare.
It's still Volare to me. So
okay, yeah, I always called it Volare.
Don't feel bad about that.
Someone corrected me the other day. Where was? I mean, Logie's. I mean, it's
It's got a rooftop now.
I'll probably never go to Logie's again the rest of my life. I feel like I'm way too old to be going to Logie's at 26. But you guys were probably in school too when I wish they still had Brothers. Brothers,
Mm-hmm.
rest in peace. That was my place when I was younger. But Diamond Dogs was also my place, and
Yes.
I'm very upset that it's gone.
R.I.P.
So I just listed like 10 places, but
Adam, I've got one more here real quick, then I'll throw it over to you. But George, can't let you get out of here without talking about OU's transition to the SEC. And, as a media member, you talked about, you've visited outside of, going to Austin, you've visited all the, the stadiums, the press boxes, the venues in the Big 12. But now that Oklahoma is going to be transitioning to the SEC, what's one or two places that OU is going to be traveling to? Whether it's going to Tuscaloosa, it's going to the Grove. What's a destination that you've kind of had on your bucket list growing up as a college football fan that you're like, damn, I'm excited that I'm going to get to go cover a game in that stadium?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot on that list. I would love to go tailgate at the Grove. As a working media member, I will probably not be able to do that, but I've heard it's just an awesome pregame atmosphere.
We know Eddie's going to be out there. There's no chance he's not sneaking out there.
We've already come up with some content ideas for that. But I think, if I had to pick one, because all of them would be great. I mean, Tuscaloosa will be awesome. There's obviously a lot of talk about the Swamp being a visit, every other year now. But for me, I think going and covering a night game at Death Valley in Baton Rouge, I bet that place is just incredible. The people there are crazy, and every game feels like a big game for them. I feel like that's also one of the best home field advantages is a night game in Baton Rouge. So I'd probably put that up there. I'm sure Baton Rouge is not a great city. I've not heard great things about it, but I bet the atmosphere in LSU on game day, especially a night game, I bet it's phenomenal.